I've taken all the honey, the last lot of honey off these hives. I'm now going to set them up for the winter. What I've left on the hive is a super, which is probably about 3/4 full of honey. Some of it is good frames, other is frames which have crystallized to some extent. Some is uncapped nectar, but between it all there's probably a good 10 kilos of honey there, plus what's in the brood box for the winter. A lot of the books talk about 40 kilos or 40 pounds or 20 kilos of honey to be left for the winter. I find that my bees very seldom use more than about 10 kilos of honey. I think that's partly because of the climate we're in South Wales, but also all my hives are insulated in one way or another, and I've got locally adapted bees, so they do not use huge amounts of honey in the winter. You do need to keep an eye on it during the winter, and I weigh them regularly, so I've got an idea of how much honey they're using. And particularly in the early spring when they start to increase their brood, you do need to watch the amount of food that's left. I do not feed my bees in the autumn. I very seldom find it necessary. As long as your bees have been bringing in honey during the summer, you should be able to take some off and leave enough for them for the winter, and I believe that honey itself is far better than any processed food. So I'm going to nadir this super. Nadir is an interesting word. It's an old English word. The nadir of something is the lowest point, and it simply means to put underneath. So I'm going to put this super underneath. Now some people think that's a bit strange, but there are several reasons for doing it. For one thing, it gives the brood box a bit of a buffer against cold weather. The higher up in the hive the brood box is, the warmer it's going to be, and putting the super underneath provides a bit of shelter against drafts, and also as the heat rises it keeps the brood box warm. Another reason is that during the winter you need to take the queen excluder out, because the queen particularly cannot move through the queen excluder, and when the bees are moving around in their cluster during the winter they need to be able to access the food wherever it is, the honey, the stored honey. Now removing the queen excluder will mean that the bees will gradually move up into the super, and they'll start laying in the super, which is okay, but it does make it awkward in the spring when you've got a super on top full of brood. If you put it underneath, the bees will not lay in it, or the queen will not lay in it, and you'll have a clean super. What the bees will do is they naturally prefer to have the honey around them, so when you put it underneath they will move it up so that it's above and around the brood box. So you have to do this fairly quickly. Give them a bit of smoke. Take the super off. Put it down here. Take this bit of insulation out. So I'm taking the queen excluder out. I'm going to put the brood box on top of the crown board to make sure the queen can't go anywhere. So I lift it off, put it on there, put the super on there like so. Then reassemble the hive. couple of other things about the winter. There's a lot of stuff you'll see on Facebook groups and in books and so on about mouse guards. Well, I think this dates back to the old days when people had solid floors and they had wide entrances, and they often left the hive with a wide entrance, and in order to stop mice going in, particularly in the winter, they put a mouse guard on. Well, modern hives, whether they're poly hives or wooden hives, had a reduced entrance, or they had the option of a reduced entrance. Now these entrances, as long as they're less than about 6 millimeters in depth, will not allow a mouse in, so you don't need a mouse guard. If you have a wooden hive with a wooden block with a reduced entrance, again, don't need a mouse guard, so forget it. I've never had any trouble with mice in the nearly 20 years I've been keeping bees. Another thing that crops up frequently is what to do with the Varroa board. In this case it's a polystyrene or plastic piece that fits underneath. A lot of people say you should leave the Varroa board out summer and winter because it encourages condensation in the hive. I've never had any condensation. I leave the Varroa boards in all year round because I believe that it's unnatural for the bees to have a huge hole underneath their colony, and also it's letting light in, it's letting drafts in, so why not close the bottom off? So I do, as far as possible, I leave it in. You do have to move it fairly frequently, because if you don't, the bees will propolis it in place, and also of course you need to inspect it to see if there's any Varroa, but also to see what's going on in the hive, which you can tell by looking at the debris on the floor. So my opinion is leave the boards in all year round, because it's more like a natural situation of a colony in a tree or in a stone wall, which wouldn't have a big hole underneath.